Hi guys, I'm Darren, and in this video we'll be checking out FrSky's tandem successor to this legendary radio. So just in case a few of you guys don't know what this transmitter is, this is a FrSky X9D. This is actually the original Plus edition, which came out around sort of 2016. So this is around a 7-8 year old transmitter right now. At that point in time, you were flying anything to do with FPV. This was the go-to transmitter to use. Absolutely everyone who was anyone really used one because they were powerful, reasonably cheap, and they just were pretty much bomb-proof as well. This transmitter has got quite a bit of a very positive legacy behind it, and to be fair, it's still a transmitter that you can buy in a slightly different form, and is still as powerful as it was back then. It really hasn't changed much. So just in case you guys are completely new to the whole sort of FrSky environment, this is a 16 channel transmitter despite the X9D name. FrSky don't really tend to use naming for describing how many channels there are on the transmitters, so the minimum you tend to see is 16 channels. So this is a 16 channel. So I actually bought this transmitter in 2017, and I bought it second hand back then, and it cost me around £125. New, they were sort of around the £200 mark, but you got to remember that this was with the standard plastic gimbals. Ballpark price to buy the equivalent new today, you'll be looking around £220 to £250, depending on whether you get the Hall effect gimbals or not. So that's the sort of price mark we're looking at. So we'll be obviously looking at those to compare them. But anyway, that is what we have been using for years, and people are still using today and are really happy with it. So what happens is progress. So that Taranis right there is running ACCST, which at the time, that's all there was. There's no problem with that. Since then, FrSky brought out the access protocol, which is when the radio's got a slight refresh. So they had the internal ISRM module instead of an XJT module, so they could run access. And now Tandem has been released, which is both 2.4 gigahertz and 900 megahertz within the same radio. Before, you would need to add like an R9 module or Crossfire in the back to get the 900 megahertz side on a radio like this, but now it's all internal. And the advantage of that over the module is that they can actually blend the two systems together to make this tandem system, which isn't just using, say, 2.4 and then using 900 as a redundancy. They're actually working together, so it's a lot more of a clever system, which is why you can't use the tandem with a 2.4 with an external module with 900 on it. So let's take a look at this new radio. So here we go. This is the new transmitter. This is an X18 tandem. So it's running the tandem system, which can still run ACCST, D16 mode and access. That's all fine. You can see access up in this corner. So let's take a look in the box and get the thing out. Okay, so here we go. This is the standard sort of case that you get with pretty much any FrSky radio now. Well, they all look the same, but they are all custom made and sized for the individual radios. So inside we've got this nice protective foam cover, which is protecting all the switches and the gimbals. So it's going to come in really good shape from the factory. These cases I actually find really useful. So in the top, we've just got some stickers and the instruction manual. And there's just a foam case. I usually just take this out because after transportation we don't really need it. But this is a really useful little pouch. I usually put antennas, stuff like that in there, so that I've always got them with the radio. So yeah, it's a really useful little pouch. Let's do the accessories first. So in this side we have our leverette neck strap. Quite a wide strap, and it has the typical two clips on the end, and you can either sort of clip one through and then clip the other through like that, so you can connect that, or there is this little sort of material loop that you can put through the hole in the radio to clip that onto. I prefer just using a standard clip, so I just clip and unclip from this. Right, so that is it as far as accessories go. You'll notice that there's no USB cable. That's one thing that's different from the X20. You've got the USB cable with that, but in all honesty, it's probably better just to get a slightly better quality USB cable anyway. But here is the radio. So we have our gimbal protectors that come with everything now, and this is it. It actually looks really quite small on screen. So let's take a look at it compared to the old X9D. Let's try and centralize it. So I've got the gimbals pretty level, and you can see physically it is smaller, but as far as the switches go, they're in a similar sort of layout to the old sort of Horus layout. So we have two switches on the shoulders, we have our pots in the middle, and we have two switches on the top. And it's the same sort of traditional layout. So 3 position switches for the front. The first 2 are 3 position switches, and then we have a 2 position and a momentary. So the standard switches are all the same. I know mine looks different, but the original it was the same pretty much as this. This side is correct. So we have the 2 front switches. That has just sort of effectively moved inwards. So they're 3 ways. That's a 3-way, and the momentary. So as far as the basic switches go, it's the same. We have sliders on the side. With the X18, they've actually gone for sort of the internal slider type. And at the moment, I'm not really too sure how I feel. I don't think this is necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just different. As far as feel goes, yeah, every time I want to get to them, I don't think I'm going to miss them. It does sort of keep them out of the way, but one thing I do like is you always know which is up and which is down. That's always up and that's always down. When I came from this, the slider part is on the back, so I got used to using them like this. And as soon as I went to the Horus and the X20, the slider part's on the front, so using them seemed backwards to me compared to how they were on the X9D. But with this, there is no way of getting it wrong. And there is a nice detent in the middle. It's absolutely fine. So compared, it's actually a stronger detent than the X9D. Yeah, and you can see it does actually protrude slightly. So your finger does find them pretty well. Just holding the radio, it does actually feel quite nice. And I will actually get the X20 out as well, just to compare those two. So we have the 2 pots in the middle. This one has a very faint detent. This one has a more pronounced detent. So that's, you know, it depends on how you're going to use them. But I think it's actually quite nice that there's one that doesn't and one that does. If I go back to the X9D, they're both pretty pronounced, and the X20, I'm sure it's like this, but both are actually a bit more pronounced on the X20. Actually the X20 locks right in. But yeah, so for something that you need sort of a more smooth adjustment, this is quite nice, but there is enough of a detent there so you can find the center, whereas this one is a bit more locked in. On the back we have our 2 momentary switches, the same as you have on the X20. But also on the X18, we have our second set of trims, which is something that people did actually feel missing from the X20. So that has been brought back from the Horus style radios onto the X18. Of course, the X9 didn't have them either, but having them as extra switches for things like iNav is brilliant. So I'm glad that these have been added. You have your 6 buttons down here, which to me, they're slightly recessed a bit too much. You can't sort of feel them as well as you can on the X20. It would have been nicer if they'd been sort of raised up, at least flush with the top, maybe even just slightly sticking up. I think it would be easier to find where these buttons are. If you're flying FPV, you can't physically see what you're pressing, so it's all done by feel. So I think that they could have been slightly better. But the actual operation of these is pretty cool. You can either have them as effectively a 6-way switch with an off position, a 6-way switch, 2 banks of 3-way switches, or you can have each one as an on-off toggle. It's quite a customizable thing, and you can choose that per model as well. Back to the standard controls, we have our standard gimbals. Now these are CNC machined outers. The insides are plastic, so it's the same sort of setup as you had on the regular X20. They are Hall effect gimbals. I've not actually adjusted any of the tensions on them. They do feel like I would personally loosen them slightly. And there is a ratchet on the throttle, which again I would probably take off. But that's all sort of personal preference. Position wise, they feel great. I'm a hybrid pincher. I never had problems with the X20, and I know some people with bigger hands thought that they were a bit close to those switches. But I can go anywhere I want. Up there, it maybe feel like I'm knocking that switch, but it's really not something I've ever done in flight. I've never actually felt like I accidentally knocked a switch, so I really don't think it's a problem. But yeah, ergonomics, it actually feels like a nice radio to hold. For thumbers, you've got these grips on the back, so you've got something there to hold on to. And for sort of proper pinchers, I guess, rather than the hybrid pinchers, you've probably got a bit more space than hybrid, because hybrid, your sort of fingers on the front a bit more. But it feels nice. These buttons actually feel a little bit looser than the X20S, but this one actually feels slightly better than the X20S. So overall, everything on there is very nice and tactile. It works as you would expect it to, and it actually feels decent quality. It feels solid. So what I'm going to do is we'll just have a quick look at a few comparatives. So we've seen that the gimbals are actually sort of higher up on this radio, so you've got a little bit less of a radio down there to hold, but it fits in your hand quite nicely. But let's take a look and see about the gimbal width compared to this radio. So if I hold them up in the air, you can see that the gimbals are spaced quite a bit wider apart than the old X9D. But again, it doesn't actually feel too bad. It feels quite nice. This actually sort of maybe feels a bit too close together now. And one last thing that we can check as far as gimbals go are the distance between the center of the gimbal and the outside of the case. What I'll do is go to roughly there. So we're looking at around 37 millimeters on the X18, and on the X9D to the bump, you're looking at about 40 millimeters. Let's get it about there. So it's about there. So yeah, around about 41 millimeters. So the gimbals on the X18 are closer to the edge of the case. And one final thing that we'll check as a comparison between the old X9 and the new X18 is the weight. So our X9D is 866 grams. Now I know that the original may weigh slightly less because I've added this switch, I've also added this button. So there may be a slight difference in weight. And the X18 is 842, which I'm actually quite surprised about because it feels heavier, even though it's actually lighter. And don't forget, this has got 900 megahertz inside it, as well as the 2.4, whereas that X9D just has the 2.4. Right, so let's just do a quick comparison between these two, because people will ask. So again, let's get the gimbals pretty level. You can see this is actually a slightly deeper transmitter. The screen is slightly bigger on the X20. So let's have a quick measure. So we're looking at around 95 for the width on the X20 and about 75 on the X18. So it's 20mm wider, and I'm guessing that it's going to be a similar sort of ratio. So 55 in the height, compared to 50 on the height for the X18. So you can also see potentially that these switches are, they actually look closer on the X20. But again, I'm a hybrid pincher. I've never actually got close to them. Let's just do a quick weigh in before we get on to the final differences, and then take a look at the radio fired up. That's 969 grams. So you're looking at over a sort of 100 grams difference in weight. So this does feel a bit heavier. So you can see here the major differences with the functionality is obviously these, and these are missing on this radio. I actually think that these trims closer to the outside are actually going to be nicer to use than these. They have been a little bit funny to find when you're sort of trying to trim the plane. You obviously get used to it, but I think that these are going to be a bit more natural. So I think this trim layout is much nicer than this trim layout. The detent, as I mentioned, this one locks in. Yeah, that one is actually a stronger lock than this one, but they both are really quite strong detents. On this is weaker than either of the two, but it's still a decent detent, and this one you do have to be careful. But again, that is probably quite a nice thing, because if you're using it maybe for a volume or something progressive, you don't necessarily want a detent to get in the way. The other thing is obviously the sliders. The switches are more back to sort of the traditional sort of trapezoid shape that you had on the X9 and on the Horus. But yeah, they all feel like nice solid switches. Absolutely nothing wrong. So let's just take a quick look on the back. Right, so the back does have a slight difference. You do have the same momentary switches that you have on the X20. But if you look along the top here, you don't have this sort of rubberized cover which covers over all the bits. So it's all pretty much there in the same place. We have our DSC trainer port, which we have here. We have our smart port, which is here. We have our SD card, which is still in the middle. We have our USB-C, which is here. And we have a headphone socket, which is here. So it's all the same as far as the connectors go, but the USB and the smart port has been swapped around, but they're out in the open. So maybe you get a slight bit of water resistance with the X20 because of its rubberized seal. But you also notice that these two antennas are sort of under these plastic covers as well, and they're recessed, which does actually make it a little bit of a pain to use. So I've got a 3D printed sort of thing so I can get it in easier. But with these, the antennas are actually just covered over with little plastic pieces, but it would be much easier to use. And the last thing, let's take a look at the battery. Inside we have a 4000 milliamp hour lithium polymer battery. It's exactly the same battery, so these things last for ages. As far as use goes, you'll get absolutely ages out of this thing, and charging it is just a case of plugging in the USB-C. Right, so I was going to try and get this video out a week ago, but I unfortunately got struck down with COVID, so that really put a scupper on this. I'm still not completely over it, but I'm doing a lot better. But instead of putting the video out, I decided to do a sort of very quick and easy video, which luckily was all I could really get done. But I did ask if there was anything people would like to know about this radio, so I could include it in this video. Skeleton Bro was asking about water resistance with these sort of transmitters. Now, this is not something that I plan on testing because I don't want to get these transmitters wet unnecessarily. I mean, they've all got holes in them, even, you know, switches, stuff like that. It's all holes. They're not really made to be used in water. Having said that, I have used my Horus for a test flight in the past. I was up doing some iNav testing, doing some return to home stuff, and the heavens absolutely opened. So it took me a little bit of time to get the plane down. When I got back to the car, I was absolutely drenched, which included my Horus. So I'll stick a picture up of that so you can see how much water that one took on that day, and it absolutely works fine still. But you know, these aren't made to be dropped in water or anything like that. And as far as I know, there's no IP rating or anything like that. So yeah, in the wet weather, use them at your own risk. All right, Aerial Aviator mentioned that it would be nicer to have a video about how it performs after some flying time, which I totally agree with. And I will be doing a video in the future covering over this, the same as I will actually be doing a video on the X20 now that I've been using it quite a lot. So I will be doing a video on that fairly soon, but also not just my opinions, other guys who have got an X20, and yeah, some of them used to use FrSky, some didn't, so it would be good to hear their perspectives as well. So yeah, long term, how it works is something that I'm definitely going to do, but yeah, you've got to start somewhere. And he also asked what the dual band means. So the dual band, as I've mentioned, is the 900 megahertz and the 2.4 gigahertz. This radio can do both of them, either individually, so you can use standard 2.4 ACCST D16, you can use 2.4 access, or you can use 900 megahertz access. And as far as the R9 access side of it goes, absolutely every R9 receiver that has ever been released will work with access. So all you need to do is flash the firmware and it will work. And access, you know, once you've used it, you don't go back. It's just so much simpler with the over-the-air updates, that sort of thing. But also the tandem side is using those two bands together. Right, so Lucas asked what the functional differences are between the X18 and the X20, and also asked about the form factor. I think we've covered most of that, but just to reiterate, the only real difference functionality is the X20 has this slider, the X18 has these two trims. And that's comparing to the standard X20. The X20S obviously has full CNC gimbals, it has rotatable gimbals, whereas this doesn't, and it also has the dual Bluetooth, so you can use the power trainer side and you can have the audio side as well. Oh, of course, and the physical screen size. But there are a lot more similarities between the two than there are differences. And again, the physical side, I'm trying to do like stick movements so you can see where my hand is. There is a slight difference. I am knocking my finger more on this than I am on this, but it's not a lot, and also I'm not potentially gripping it how I would when I'd fly. And as far as weight goes, there's a little bit more weight in the X20. But yeah, they are the main differences. Prophet 11236 again asked about the two different RF frequencies, which we've covered. So let's switch the thing on, shall we?
Welcome to ETHOS. Switch warning.
Right, so I've not actually changed anything yet. This is as it comes out the box. So let me try and get that screen a little bit better for you guys. So this is a touch screen. So let me go into general where I can change the brightness down a bit, just so that it's easier for you guys to see. And yeah, it is a nice responsive touchscreen, exactly the same as we have on the X20, but it is a little bit smaller. That's the main difference. You can see I'm currently running on 1.2.1 on this. I will be doing videos on updating this, which is on 1.1 still, to 1.2, and I will also do a video on updating this to the latest 1.2 version using ETHOS suite, so we'll have both update methods. But to be honest, the touchscreen, it's awkward for me to use on the video. Using it in person, it's absolutely fine. The jog wheel, as I mentioned, this one actually feels a bit more sturdy than the X20, so I actually prefer this jog wheel. And this button here, the X20, does feel a little bit more precise, but again, this functions perfectly well. We still get all our really nice animated menus, so you can see the hardware check screen. There's not really a lot of difference as far as ETHOS goes. The operating system is the same as you'd find on the X20, and if you're watching this video because you're thinking about getting an X18 and you've never used FrSky, never used ETHOS, you can actually download the simulator to test out ETHOS. It is on either a Horus or the X20, but you can actually download a version of this to play with on your computer so you can get used to how it operates. But you can see it's you know, nice and fluid. There's no slowdown or anything like that. This version obviously has all the Lua script support, so we have a full screen telemetry. I believe on the hardware, what I couldn't find was the gyro calibration. Again, it may just be on this version of ETHOS, but the gyro is actually on this, so it's not like it's missing. Because if I went into that, I can choose a value, select source, gyro, x-axis. So you can see when I move the transmitter, the gyro is all working. So it's not that they've cut that out of this radio. It is there. So there's a lot of, you get a lot of radio for this. So the last thing that we should probably discuss is the cost of this radio. I've been comparing it to the old X9D throughout this video, and also we've taken a comparison between the X20. So where does it fit in with things? Right, so on screen we have here the latest version of the Taranis X9D Plus SE, which is the only one to really compare it to fairly because they both have the Hall effect gimbals. You can see they're both, this is the CNC outer with the plastic inner. So the gimbals are, even though they're not the same gimbal, they're the same sort of type. And both Hall effect, CNC outer plate, plastic workings. So that's the radio that we really need to compare this to. And you can see here on Horus RC, it is up for $260. On the same website, we are comparing the X18, which is $280. So we've only got a $20 difference here, which is really not a lot considering effectively this is an 8-year-old radio with a couple of minor updates. So this has the ISRM module and not the XJT module as of the original. And yeah, it can run Access, so it's quite comparable. Whereas the X18 is a brand new radio. It does have tandem, so that means it also has 900 megahertz, but it can use them together. It's not just a case of the two frequencies, one as redundancy, and you know, just using it that way. They are actually a blended system, which you can't actually do even if you added an R9 module to this radio. It needs to be specific tandem hardware. So that $20 difference, even at this age, doesn't seem like a lot. But when you consider to get this radio up to, you know, as close to the specs of this radio as possible, you need to add one of these things. This is the R9M module, which gives you the 900 megahertz side, and this is $35. So basically, adding that to the cost of this, you're basically saving $15 by getting the new radio, which the new radio will give you the color LCD screen, which is also a touch screen, and tandem functionality. The only thing that people may not like is this is running ETHOS, this is running OpenTX. But as I've said earlier in this video, download the simulator and try it out. I am a huge fan of OpenTX, have been for, since I've had my Taranis. It's a very logical system to use for me, but I've had no problems with ETHOS. My quite complex FPV system, I've got everything working on ETHOS. It's a pretty powerful system. The only thing that may hold people back at the moment is some of the modules that you can use with it. So at the moment you can't use Crossfire, Express LRS or Ghost with it. Now I know that FrSky are actually working on a twin light transmitter which does have Express LRS. I also know that the developers of ETHOS have said that Crossfire and Ghost protocols will be coming in the future after the Lua scripts have been implemented, and the Lua scripts have just been implemented. Two and two together, we've got a new product coming out with Express LRS 2.4 in it, and Express LRS runs using the Crossfire protocol as far as the receiver to flight controller and radio to transmitter communications go. So that plus the developer saying Crossfire and Ghost is coming hopefully will mean that Crossfire at very least is coming quite soon. It's just showing that for quite a short period of time ETHOS has come along a long way, and there's a lot of really useful functionality on there, and to be honest, unless you're really getting into the hardcore stuff, you won't really miss OpenTX. There's obviously issues with Lua scripts. Yeah, the Lua script system is still quite new, so there may be scripts that haven't been converted over for ETHOS yet, so that might be an issue. But as far as actually using it goes, setting up models, it is nicer than OpenTX. If you're flying line of sight, the new model creation tool is just miles ahead of what OpenTX had. It goes into a lot of detail and will create a pretty complex model without you having to even do anything. And then if you do need to take it further, there are already predefined mixes that can help along the way with that too. So as far as for a traditional style model, it's a much nicer system to use than OpenTX. But you have to use what you're happy with at the end of the day. I'm not saying that either one is better. I'm just saying that at the moment the two are pretty much comparable in what you can do with them. So one other thing that you may have spotted on this screen here is there is a full CNC gimbal upgrade available, which on Horus you can pay for and they'll install it. So here we go. This is the MC18 all CNC Hall effect gimbal, and it also has a 45-degree travel limiter kit with it. So you can upgrade the semi-CNC plastic gimbals for the full CNC machined gimbals. And to be honest, the cost of those is pretty similar to what we've seen with upgrades for other radios in the past. I have spoken with FrSky, and from what I understand at the moment there is no plans for an X18S, and I was told explicitly that they didn't want to bring out an S model, but all it had was the CNC gimbals, and they said it's unlikely that it would have rotatable gimbals just because of the space inside that radio. So if you want the rotatable gimbals that the X20S has, you won't be seeing that on an X18. I guess one more thing that we could compare price wise is the X20 itself. So we've got both prices on screen. The X20 standard version is the closest to the X18 in terms of what you get with it. So they both have CNC gimbals with plastic inners. They both have the same Bluetooth capabilities, but with the X20 you get the red slider, with the X18 you get the 2 extra trims, and also the screen is bigger on the X20. But you're looking at $80 more for the X20, and the X20S is $180 more, which gives you those full CNC gimbals, which when you think about it, they're what, $60 each anyway? Well, $55 each, so there's $110 worth of gimbals going in to boost that price up. But also there's the second Bluetooth module in there as well. So that's the price differences. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But I hope this video sort of helped just give you some ideas about the radio. I'm not here to sell it to you. I'm just basically here to say what I think about it, and where it sort of sits. The rest of it is completely up to you. All I can tell you is what I think about it at this point in time, and it actually feels like a nice radio. Like with any transmitter, I would always recommend try getting hold of one. How it physically feels in your hands is going to be one of the big deciders anyway. It needs to physically fit with how you hold and use the radio. How nice the materials are is obviously important, because if you drop it, the better materials are going to last longer. But how it feels in your hand is quite important, and we're all different. All our hands are different, but how it feels to you is the most important thing. When you think about it, the radio is your feel for the plane, so it's quite an important piece of equipment. The next thing obviously is your eyes. If you're flying line of sight, it's going to be your eyes. If it's FPV, it's your camera and your the video goggles. So those interfaces to how you feel and interact with the aircraft are the most important things. So picking the right transmitter is a pretty important task. But I hope this video has been useful for you guys. Don't forget, if you're brand new to this, check out the simulator. It's a really nice handy way of seeing how things work without actually having to put any money down at the end of the day. But thank you for watching. If you did find this video useful, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon. That will not only give you alerts when I have a new video coming out, which could be on ETHOS, which may be a subject interested to you, or just RC flight in general, but also it will help get this video out to more people who can learn about the X18 too, and maybe it will help them out. At the end of the day, that's why I do this. I like helping people out. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Fly your models like you stole them. Don't get COVID, it's horrid. See you later. Bye.